Joseph Stalin in the 1920s and early 30s killed and murdered over 20 million Christians, most of them Baptists and Pentecostals, in the Ukraine in the Great Purge of 1929. And it's interesting, we hear a lot about 6 million Jews being killed. How many of you have heard that 20 million Baptists and Pentecostals were murdered by Joseph Stalin in 1929 and 30? Somehow that has failed to make our history books. But it is a fact. Why were Christians a threat? It is because they believe that man is a unique creation given by God freedom and liberty. Mao Zedong in China understood this. Mao Zedong killed 50 million Chinese during the Great Purge of China. During the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, nearly 1 million Christians were murdered in China by the Red Guard for their faith. It's interesting that if you go to China, and I've had the privilege of being in mainland China on 5 occasions. The first time I went into China was in 1975, right after Zhou Enlai and Richard Nixon had opened up the country to foreigners. In fact, my father and I were 2 of the very first foreigners to go into China after it opened. We went to visit Christians who had suffered tremendous persecution during the Cultural Revolution. While we were there, we went to the famous Peking Zoo, and now Beijing. And it was interesting when, in 75, when we went to the Peking Zoo to see the panda bears, that at the entrance to the zoo, they had this 150-foot mural that you see a picture I took here. This is just part of it. But a 150-foot mural at the very entrance of the zoo showing the supposed evolution of life, the molecule to man theory, that man was simply evolved pond scum and was nothing more than an animal. You see, they understood that as long as man was simply an animal, then the state was justified in manipulating it. And it's interesting, wherever evolution becomes dominant, this philosophy of man evolving from pond scum, people and human value loses out. The sad thing is what we have in America today, in the red and blue states, is really a battle over whether we are a nation of animals or whether we are a nation of people created by a loving creator. How you answer this question will determine everything else in life. And it's very interesting how this is reflected in our society today. I was on a plane flight a few years ago, late at night, crossing the country, and they had upgraded me to first class, and I was sitting next to a man who was drinking one vodka after another. Anytime you see somebody drinking like that, you know the guy has deep-seated problems. And as we started talking, he told me that he was a medical doctor, an OBGYN, and because he mentioned that, I had been reading in the paper that day, there were several articles in USA Today about the issue of abortion. And so I thought I'd ask this OBGYN about that. And it's very interesting. It was late at night. He had been drinking heavily. And it's interesting what a man's heart will say when the press and the lights are not on him. And he said, well, you need to understand, I'm the president of Planned Parenthood in my state. And then he said these words to me, and I wrote them down so I'd never forget them. He said, some doctors have moral qualms with abortion. He says, not me. He says, I just scrape them out and flush them down the toilet. Those were his exact words. And I thought, you know, you would never say that in front of television cameras, sober. But late at night, after drinking, the true nature of your heart comes out. But his justification was, if man is nothing but an animal, if man is nothing but evolved slimy algae, who cares? What value does it have? I was speaking at a major university on the East Coast recently, 3 nights in the science auditorium, and one of the professors of science there in the secular university wanted to have lunch with me, and he said to me, he said, Ron, he said, what you're teaching about the scientific evidence for creation is not only good science, he says it's basic common sense, but he says, I have to admit to you, I'm still going to teach evolution. And when I asked him why, he said, you need to understand, he said, to be honest with you, evolution is morally comfortable. Morally comfortable. I said, what do you mean? Morally comfortable. He said, well, as long as I believe I'm nothing but an animal evolved from pond scum, he says, I can live morally any way I choose. He said, I can go to bed with any girl I choose. If they're just slimy algae, who gives a rip? But he says, and these were his words, I wrote them down. He says, as soon as you admit there's a creator, he says, then you become morally responsible to that creator. And he says, frankly, I don't want to be morally responsible to anybody. For the last 30 years, I've lectured in 79 countries around the world in major universities on the scientific evidence for creation. And I've come to the conclusion that it's no longer an intellectual or scientific issue. As I've lectured around the world, I'm convinced that they understand it's a moral issue. That the reason they hold so tenaciously to evolution, in spite of the evidence, because there is no scientific evidence for evolution, the reason they hold to it is they understand it's a moral issue. That if you lose evolution, folks, they have no moral justification for abortion. They have no moral justification for homosexuality. They have no moral justification for adultery. If you lose evolution and man's not an animal, folks, the whole ballgame changes morally in this country. This is why people hold to evolution in spite of the evidence. It's very interesting if you look at what is at the heart of the cultural divide between the red and blue states. At the heart of this cultural divide, all you have to do is look at the two political party platforms from 2004. It's very interesting. Read the platforms. Because we have one political party in this country, reflected largely by the blue states, that really believes man is an animal. Therefore, their political platform in 2004 justified abortion on demand, justified homosexual marriage, justified central big government to control how you think and how you live from the cradle to the grave. You have another political party, mainly reflected in the red states, whose political platform believes and states that man is a unique creation of an almighty, loving creator. They view life as a higher value than choice. They view marriage as sacred between a man and a woman. They understand that government is to be the servant of we, the people, and believe that the 10 Commandments are really the 10 great freedoms that society is built upon. They understand that where these are the foundations of society, you have freedom and liberty. And it's interesting, this whole issue of the 10 Commandments that was argued before the Supreme Court in February of this year.